ACMi productions are only made possible with your support. Visit patreon.com/ACMi to learn how you can help.
Good evening, everyone. I am David Morgan. I'm Arlington's Environmental Planner and Conservation Agent. December 5th, 2024 public meeting of the Arlington Conservation Commission shall be conducted in a remote format consistent with the Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, which extended remote participation in public meetings, 31st of March 2025. Going to paste a link in the chat right now where all of the meeting materials can be found. Our meeting is being recorded and the recording may be made publicly available. Oftentimes is shown on local ACMi channel. The Zoom chat feature may be used for questions and comments that contribute to the Commission's procedures, and if it's used otherwise, it may be disabled at the chair's discretion. Public comment period will follow each hearing. It doesn't matter, we didn't have any hearings this evening. As always, we do encourage participation and that you ask questions and comments and so forth. Chuck Taroni is our commission chair. He'll facilitate tonight's meeting and we take votes roll call fashion. We'll start with
Sure. And David, before we get started, can you give me co-hosting permission? So if someone does I do need to do something, I can get to it quicker. Okay, so the agenda tonight, December 5th, 2024, we're going to start out with some administrative items, which are just our emails that we've received about various projects. Then we're going to get into a restoration at McClellan Park by Lane Crowder, and George Parson will do a presentation on Spy Pond coring. Our various groups, water bodies, tree committee, CPA, parks, SEMS will give us updates. And then our one hearing tonight for Thorndike Place, we have a request by the applicant to continue that until December 19th. And with that, I'll do a roll call vote. A roll call attendance is Mike Gildersgame.
Present.
Nathaniel Stevens.
Present.
Susan Chapnick.
Present.
David White. I see David, he's here. David White. We'll move on to David Kaplan.
Present.
Brian McBride.
Present.
I just want it noted that David White is here. He just doesn't have his video or microphone on. Associate members, Sarah Alfaro Franco.
Present.
And Eileen Coleman. And Eileen is not here. I don't see her on the screen. With that, we'll go on to our first agenda item. And just to let you know, the correspondence we received during the meetings between the course of the last meeting and this meeting are available to the public. For full list, contact our conservation agent at the link that he's provided in the chat. And our administrative report is there's no administrative report planned for tonight's meeting. And with that, we'll go right on to the first discussion item. So for the first discussion item, we have a resident, Elaine Crowder, who is working on invasive management to restore McClellan Park. And she has a proposal for approval, and it's to preserve and restore open space. So if you could just turn your microphone on and introduce yourself. Do you have permissions to share a screen if you wanted to give the commission this presentation?
I don't know. That's where to see that. I see a share sign.
Good.
But are you prepared to do that, or is that something David needs to do, or are you just going to talk to us?
I have I have it on my screen, so I could share if you would like that.
Sure. Before you get started, Elaine, Chuck, I want to ask a quick question, maybe under administrative report real quick, because Randy Myron is here from from the Bowler about the question of the 1165R certificate of compliance. I want to make sure we're on the same page about issuing that certificate. Since I've missed the last meeting, wanna
Yeah.
confirm that we're
Do we have Randy come on and ask his question before we get into the report? The other discussion items?
Yeah, I mean, Randy or Andy, you can feel free to weigh in, but the question was ultimately, are we good to move forward with issuance based on delegating the matter of the deed restriction to me to sort out? And did you vote at the last meeting? I wasn't clear on that. No.
No, we didn't. One of the issues was for me to figure out what was going on. So we postponed that. We didn't vote at all. And I can't remember if there was another issue we were waiting for. Does anyone else remember off the top of their head? Or is it just the restriction?
It was just the deed restriction. We didn't feel comfortable doing the COC without understanding the issues from town council. And so you were going to look into it with town council, David. David White has his hand up.
I'm here now. Just like,
Oh,
just
thank
get
you, David.
Okay.
I have my minutes from the last meeting. Let me just check. I mean, my notes, I didn't the
Thanks.
minutes. So let me see. Was that, what date was that again? Remind me.
November.
Was it November 21st?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Let me just review my minutes real quick. We had certificate of compliance 1165R. It says if it was a deed restriction, then we'd be comfortable issuing a certificate of compliance. However, we didn't know if it was if there was going to be a CR on it, and we need to know what's going to be proposed. Nathaniel will follow up with David Morgan and town council. So the motion was to continue to tonight, and we forgot to put it on the agenda, so that's our bad. But I don't know if there's been any understanding of the conservation restriction on this property or a deed restriction.
And I know that Nathaniel followed up with town council.
David, sorry, can you get closer to your microphone a little bit? Thanks.
I know that Nathaniel followed up with town council to get the latest copy of the draft document, and she wasn't sure that she had it. So we need to get together with town council and work on that. As for what to do with the COC, I believe my initial recommendation was approval with that pending. I think it's sufficiently advanced, sort of matured to the point that it's, you know, just a matter of signatures before we're good to go. I would feel more comfortable with signing and issuing the paperwork and not holding up the process on the deed restriction side.
We thought the same thing, but then there was information in the packet about a conservation restriction. And if it's just a deed restriction, the Conservation Commission felt comfortable with your approach. But if there was a conservation restriction as well, we did not feel comfortable.
Okay. It does.
So I don't know, do you know the difference?
The form of a conservation restriction. We're following the state's template for.
So it is a conservation restriction, and who's holding the restriction?
That I don't know.
Yeah, that wasn't answered on that. But yeah, town council seemed to be waiting waiting to hear back from the applicant's counsel. I think she has some comments on it, was my sense, but David may have a different take on it. But I was going to say, if we're going to vote, I think we make it a continuing condition that this be provided in a timely manner. So at least we have some enforcement authority. We're not going to just sign off on the whole thing.
Right.
I would not recommend that.
Right.
Because if the conservation restriction is not approved, then I think the backup would be a deed restriction.
Okay. So that was, so it's a conservation restriction and the backup is a deed restriction. That was not clear to me.
But folks, do you mind if I jump in? But
Sure.
the condition within the order of conditions states a deed restriction. There's nothing about a conservation restriction within the order of
Oh,
conditions.
okay, thanks for that reminder. Yeah.
But
Okay,
then
yeah.
somebody changed it, and that's why we're having this discussion, and that's why
Well,
we're not comfortable.
but it can't be changed. I mean, I agree with Randy. It's got to be, can someone remind me? I think that was the part of the problem last time is we didn't have a copy of the order to check the language. But yeah, if it's a deed restriction,
That's what we said.
then
It's a
I'm
deed restriction
for
in
it.
our order. And then it morphed into a conservation restriction later after
Somehow.
our order. And that's
Yeah.
what we're
That was
confused
on
about.
town council's advice.
So do we still need to reach out to town council, and knowing that it says deed restriction in the order of conditions, can we move forward this approval? It's not on the agenda, so there's a problem there.
In this case, I think I don't know.
It sounds like this needs to be continued to the 19th with some research in between.
Yeah,
To see what's in the order of conditions and see if town council has any comments or suggestions.
Well, we know what's in the order of conditions. The
I-
order of
I-
conditions says a deed restriction. I guess the issue is if the town council is recommending a conservation restriction instead of a deed restriction, where does that put us in
Right.
terms of certificate of compliance
that's
with
just-
permit?
I don't know where that's coming from. It sounds like someone just
Right.
doesn't
Someone
know what
got
they're,
confused.
yeah, someone
Yeah.
got
Oh,
confused.
okay, okay.
I think we're at a point where we can't vote on this tonight because A, it's not on the agenda, and maybe some more research. So
Folks, this was continued at the last meeting on 11/21 to 12/5. So
Right.
not on the agenda.
I know, but it's. I mean,
So
don't we
I'm
have-
just refreshing my recollection. So I think what happened, Randy, is that a deed restriction was not sent to town council, but an easement was sent to the town council. So she was waiting for either a CR or a deed restriction draft back. But so I think that's my understanding where the status is between the attorneys.
right. I think you're right.
But
Yeah.
I think we could still potentially issue a contingent on a continuing condition, or we just issue a partial certificate of compliance.
How do you deal with the,
But we don't like to do this partials.
Nathaniel, how do we get around it not being on the agenda?
Right, was this,
Well,
yeah, you can,
certificates of
because
compliance.
this topic was anticipated more than 48 hours ahead, right?
It wasn't anticipated at our prep meeting, and it was only brought up today to me when I talked to David around 4:00.
Okay,
was
well
brought-
then, yeah, because I mean, you're allowed to bring up, I mean, it's not great form, obviously, but you're allowed to bring up things that were not anticipated 48 hours in advance when you
Right,
posted the
and it
agenda.
says that on our agenda, we have that blurb.
Blurb, yeah.
Yeah, but does that mean to have a discussion or to decide what we're going to do about it? So,
Right,
I
yeah,
mean,
I
does
mean,
that mean to have a vote? Or is it to decide, bring it up so we can decide?
Well, deliberation potentially includes a vote. I mean, right? Because we're not holding a public hearing per se on it.
No.
It's just it's open meeting law issue.
Right, and just as a matter of protocol, we've always included certificates of compliance, including this last one in my notes, under discussion items, not under hearings,
Right.
because we
And
don't
I think
allow public comment.
And we did also announce at the last meeting that this would be continued to this evening's
Exactly.
meeting. So anyone who wanted to attend would have known that. Should have known that, had notice of it. I don't think we had anyone
No, we didn't.
who was interested in it.
We didn't. And again, it's not under hearings, it's under discussion items as an agenda item.
I don't know how that helps, but
Well, it is because
so
we
I had-
don't have public comment on discussion items generally.
Yeah, I think
At your
that
discretion.
Nathaniel,
Yeah.
if you can give us some direction, I think the commission would go with it. is it you believe that we're in good standing if we took a vote on this?
Right. I mean, I think you're in compliance with the open meeting law. Whether it's good practice is a separate issue. And the ideal practice is you would continue it to the next meeting and put it on the agenda. But you're not, I don't think you're running afoul of an open meeting law violation if you said you didn't anticipate this. It just popped up at the last minute. And we're dealing with it. So it's, I guess it's really whatever you decide is best. But I don't see it wasn't something that you guys knew about and left off the agenda. I think we're also helped by the fact that we announced at the last meeting 3 weeks ago that it would be continued to this evening. So it's not as if it's a brand new item either, but it's a close call.
Yeah, I guess we're going to entertain bringing this up for a vote but on the other hand, it does seem like there's some things that could be looked into. So I guess the time between the next two meetings wouldn't be wasted, but I'd like to know, I guess I'd like to know by someone making a motion whether we're going to move forward or not. That would be the best way.
Yeah, or hear from others as to what they want to do. Yeah.
Comments and motion.
Just to clarify for me, we would be voting on issuing a CFC with the contingency that the deed restriction was be executed in a reasonable period of time. Is that the kind of thing we're looking at?
That's what was one of the comments that Daniel made.
Yeah, that would be what I call the contingency would be the special.
Nathaniel, you're popping in and out for me. I don't know about for anybody else.
Yeah, I thought it was me. Okay.
Oh, I didn't hear what you said, so maybe try again.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I just got a message saying that. I was responding to Brian to say that would be the way to do it. A contingency would be a special condition. Sorry, strike that. A continuing condition that this deed restriction or CR deed restriction be done and recorded ASAP.
Is it so? I'm just wondering. So we're adding a condition to the order of conditions.
Well, we are handling it as a certificate of compliance. But yes, in some ways you are adjusting it, but it doesn't. Yeah. We three options. We or issue an order certificate of compliance completely. Don't worry about it. Take the applicant on their word. Second, we issue a partial certificate of compliance saying that they've complied with everything except for this, and that they need to return to us once they get the deed recorded, and then we'd issue a complete certificate of compliance at that point, or we issue a certificate of compliance now with the continuing condition that they file the deed restriction by a date certain, because that would give us enforcement authority to say that they haven't complied.
David White.
We need to decide tonight. Can we just put it off to next meeting?
Yeah, that's off. I guess the 4th.
No.
Yeah, that'll be number 4 on the list. Randy, let me bring you in here and just ask. I know it's inconvenient to come back to the Arlington, even though it's a beautiful town. If we put this off, what is the issue? I don't expect this to be resolved by the next meeting, meaning you're not going to have a deed restriction on the 19th, but we may have more clarity. Other than that, is there anything you can offer?
I mean, it's really just our clients asking us to get the certificate of compliance kind of buttoned up. And, we had told them that it was continued to the meeting tonight. And, they've been working with town council towards getting that deed restriction, I'd say, finalized, but there's still some work to do before it can get recorded and everybody's in agreement, and, both parties are in agreement. So that's kind of where we're at.
All right. Thank you. So I'm not in favor of issuing a full certificate of compliance. I would go with the option B, which is a partial, which you return anyway. So I don't know how much ground you're going to cover on that. Or continuing to the next meeting. Those are the two options I think are most valid for me, because I'm also shying away from adding a condition to a issued order of conditions.
I agree, Chuck.
So
Plus, I will say that Randy does not have to attend any meetings for the COC. You know, once we get all the ducks in order, you don't have to be here, Randy. We just vote. So that saves you time too.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, you could tell your client that it wouldn't have been resolved with a partial certificate of compliance anyways. It's still hanging out there. David Kaplan.
Yep. So it sounds like the commission isn't comfortable issuing a certificate of compliance until the deed restriction is actually recorded. So do we just continue indefinitely until that happens and have the applicant come back?
No, that's not what I heard. I heard that we're not, well, I myself is not comfortable in issuing a full certificate of compliance at this moment, because it's not on the agenda, where we would need to put in a condition that's not in the order of conditions. And it seems like there's some more clarity that could be gained in between the two meetings. And so at the next meeting, even if it's not recorded, I think with David looking into this and with town council, we could be clear that it is a deed restriction and that we have some assurances from both councils that this will be resolved, in a timely manner.
Okay.
I think David Kaplan has the good question of what's resolved mean? Does it mean recorded or just agree to the form of the document signed? I think David's asking you some good questions. I would posit, what does the order, the special condition say? Or that they're required to just have a deed restriction, or required to have it recorded and provide proof of recording?
David Morgan, that's where you come in and tell us what that condition says on the order of conditions.
Or Susan might have it in front of her. It sounds like maybe. No,
I just see. Yeah. She maybe.
It says a deed restriction. Oh, you want me to look up the original order of conditions and tell you what the actual wording is? I can do that.
Yes, please. If you could, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, I can do it pretty quick. I still have that question though, Chuck. If we continue, we're continuing. And why? And I guess my question is, why does the deed restriction take so long? Why?
Because it's drafting a document between two lawyers, and it goes back and forth and back and forth.
Okay, so it's a lawyer thing. It's not.
Yeah, blame it on the lawyers. But yeah, I mean, it also depends on when it was proposed and stuff like that. So,
and we did want the leverage of having to speed this up, to not issue the certificate of compliance until we had the deed restriction. That was the thought, or had some more information on the certificate of the conservation restriction.
Okay, so I have the wording. Let me go down to, probably needs to be the end somewhere.
And Susan, while you're doing that, if I could
Yes.
jump in, this is Andy Platt from Bullard. We have a deed restriction that's already drawn up that's been sent to town council. So if I could share that on the screen, it's at least evidence that the process is moving. And it's definitely a deed restriction too. So do you mind if I share my screen and just show that?
well, I think respectfully, I think town council disagrees that what you sent over, it constitutes a deed restriction. So I don't think it's totally beneficial for us to be debating that if we're waiting for sign off from our council.
I have the wording if you want to listen.
Sure.
Ready? Okay, so it's special condition 56. Based on applicant's agreement to the Conservation Commission to adhere to the conditions in the comprehensive permit date land under the relocated Ryder Brook shall be protected in perpetuity through a recorded deed restriction. And this shall be a continuing condition that survives the expiration of this order of conditions and shall be included in any certificate of compliance as a continuing condition. Then there's 57, which says the same thing about the bank of Ryder Brook. So that also has to be a deed restriction. So it's the land under the brook and the bank of the relocated brook. Both need deed restrictions to be protected in perpetuity, and that it's a continuing condition that survives the COC. So if we approve the COC, those are the continuing conditions we put on it.
Yeah, but it did say recorded. So
Yes.
did that mean it will be, or it is as they approach the certificate of compliance? What is the reading of that?
It says, shall be protected in perpetuity through a recorded deed restriction. We did that on purpose to require them to record it.
So it sounds like it needs to, I mean, I understand it needs to be recorded, but what's the timing on it?
There's no timing. It just says this shall be a continuing condition that survives the expiration of this order of conditions and shall be included in any certificate of compliance as a continuing condition. Does that mean that
And
we
56
can
and
do a
50.
certificate of compliance and say the continuing condition is that the brook shall be protected and a deed restriction shall be recorded? And it doesn't have to be done at that juncture? Can be interpreted two ways.
That was the argument I was just gonna make, Susan. I think that additional clause opens us up to option 3 that Nathaniel suggested about issuing and having the continuing condition for 56 and 57 remain in force.
I think I agree with you now that I reread it. Because it doesn't say the deed restriction has to be recorded in order to get a certificate of compliance. It says that it shall be included in any certificate of compliance as a continuing condition that they need to record it. So we can just pull out that language exactly as 56 and 57 and put it in a COC.
I don't have the order of conditions in front of me, but where it says when the applicant's ready to request a certificate of compliance, what are the requirements there? Usually it says Form 8A, a letter from an engineer, blah, blah, blah.
Okay, let me check that. Where do we usually put that, David?
Probably
Is that
right,
all the way
right.
up front or?
Usually it's one of the last things. I don't see it in this one. I'm not sure that it was.
So there are several continuing conditions besides this one. There's one about the mitigation plantings. That has to be a continuing condition. Pervious surfaces has to be continuing condition. All the landscaping, I mentioned that. Continuing condition. Snow storage issues, which they said they're not storing snow.
Can I also add that the 56 and 57 are reiterating what's in the comprehensive permit?
Yeah.
And so this is not really original content to the order of conditions. It's just reflecting another town body's decision. So it's not as though the commission premised issuance of the permit on this happening. They're saying this already happened. We're going to be the backstop to make sure that this happens. And I think that's why it's written in such a vague way that says this shall be a continuing condition, blah, 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 because it's not substantial to the permit.
I did find the certificate of compliance. It's number 38, David. And it says, when requesting a certificate of compliance for this order of conditions, the applicant must submit a written statement from a Massachusetts professional engineer registered land surveyor, or registered landscape architect certifying that the completed work complies with the plans referenced in this order, or provide a stamped as-built plan and statement describing any differences. It doesn't say anything about the continuing conditions, which are listed separately. I think David Kaplan has.
Yeah, David Kaplan has his hand up.
Yeah, so after the discussion, it sounds like even if we do issue it a certificate of compliance tonight, that with the continuing conditions of the COC, we can enforce the bank, the land under the relocated brook, as well as the applicant's recording a deed restriction. So it seems like, I don't know, maybe somebody disagrees, but it seems like we're not losing anything by issuing a certificate of compliance tonight. Does anybody have a different read?
Yeah.
I
have a
agree with
different read.
you. I think that the COC needs to list all the continuing conditions and not just the deed restriction. There's several others. And we always do that in a COC. We always list what are the continuing conditions in perpetuity.
Sure. My read is that it seems to me that we're tying things together. It's a little sloppy, and I don't think it needs to be this way. And all these things could be prepared and tidied up, and we could look at this and have no issues at all. I know the client wants to continue. I'm not asking for the commission to change their mind based on this, but when things come to the Conservation Commission, they should be ready to go. And with that, is there any more discussion or motions? I'm not sure if we lost Nathaniel, but because he turns his video off to get a better connection.
All right. Yeah, I was just trying to. My internet was unstable again. Sorry. I think it's the computer. But yeah, I think we give up leverage, but there is some reference to the comprehensive permit. I guess we also need to straighten out town council, communicate to town council that this is a deed restriction, not a CR.
It's our brook. You know,
Right.
I know it's in the comprehensive permit, but I'm having a hard time believing we're backing up them instead of they backing us up, because it's our brook and we want to protect it in perpetuity.
Right.
So.
Right. So I would definitely feel more comfortable if the deed restriction was recorded. I guess it's not a well-written condition, but I think
We lost
Nathaniel, you got to turn your video off again.
Turn your video off. Yeah. Say that again.
I'm sorry.
We lost you, Nathaniel. We were just saying maybe you want to turn your video off.
Yeah, sorry.
And
sorry
repeat what you just said, because we missed the end of it.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say I defer to what other people want to do, but I just feel like in the past, when we've had this type of condition, and my experience with other conservation commissions is that we require such documents to be recorded before we issue a COC. So I think that was the underlying intent in the special condition, although I agreed it was not well written and didn't clarify. So it's vulnerable to multiple interpretations.
So does that speak towards a partial approval tonight? Contingent on the filing of the deed restriction? Or are we going to wait?
That sounded more like a let's continue. This doesn't seem so.
Again, I'm just one voice. That's just my thought on it. Because I mean, how else are we going to, if it's a continued condition, there's no deadline on when that's recorded, and they can just say, well, we're complying, we'll file one in the future, we'll record one in the future. So.
All right.
I'm not sure. But if folks are comfortable issuing, I guess someone can make a motion. But.
All right, someone needs
Can
to,
I just ask Randy one question, Chuck?
sure.
Okay, Randy, I know you're getting pressure from your client to get the certificate of compliance, but you know you wouldn't even get the comprehensive permit without the deed restriction. So what is the rush?
So the comprehensive permit's been closed out. I mean, the project has received its final certificate of occupancy. All the
Oh,
con-
really? So they gave it to you without the deed restriction, which is in their permitting
Correct.
process as well. Interesting.
That's correct.
But it is a continuing requirement. And so I guess they made the decision that you were acting in good faith and it was a continuing requirement. So,
Yeah, I think, Susan, you may be jumping to conclusions.
Yeah, I don't know.
believe they're doing the same thing we're doing here tonight, saying if we sign off, at least the comprehensive permit is still out there to make sure
But
that
it's
this
not.
happens. Right,
It's
so
not.
so
So
it
then we
sounds,
lose that. So, yeah.
all right, Susan, hold on a second.
Mhm.
So it sounds like we're gonna be the only ones holding this up for compliance with the order of conditions. So it's all on us. Just take that into consideration. But I think we've really talked about this enough. Can I get a motion with whoever feels like they understand what the consensus of the commission wants to go? I would make a motion myself, but it would be more or less where I want to go.
Which is where,
My motion would be to not do anything tonight and have the applicant come back when they have a recorded deed restriction.
oh, so move.
I'll second.
I second.
So who moved and who
It
seconded?
was Nathaniel and I
David,
think David White. Okay, Mike Gilderscame,
yes.
Susan Chapnick,
Yes.
David Kaplan,
Yes.
Brian McBride,
Yes,
Nathaniel Stevens,
Yes.
David White, and
Yes.
Chuck Tirone says yes. All right. Hopefully it's clear the commission would like to see a recorded deed restriction prior to you coming back with a request for a certificate of compliance.
Folks,
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Randy. Yep, Andrew. Moving back to our discussion items. Lane Crowder has been in the wings. I think we're going to get a presentation. And if we're okay to move on, I would say let's move forward with that. And yep, there you are.
Hello.
Hello.
Let me just share my screen. Okay, oops. Do you see the screen or do you
Yes.
see the
Yes.
full screen? Okay. And let me do the slideshow. So tonight I wanted to just review a little bit about what we've been doing, the ARMI, Arlington Mass Invasives at McLennan. You have received previous to this a report of the invasives work that we did there last winter. So I'm not going to, I'm not going to review that. But we're doing, the Army has sort of a motto of removing invasives to make way for natives. And so this is about the second part of it, making way for natives. Our rationale is that biodiversity is important for life to continue on the planet. And in particular, we're doing our small part in that at McLennan. UN has some very large targets. They recognize that all of these targets need to be done at local levels, not just on global levels. And one of those targets is 30 and 30, which is 30% to restore 30% of degraded ecosystems by the year 2030. And there's a focus on.
I can't see that you're advancing. I'm not sure if anybody else is able to see the screen either. Okay, so
It-
maybe click out of the slideshow mode and stick with the slides. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay. So you didn't see in advance?
No.
Okay, just a second. Exit slideshow, just do it like this. Can you see it now?
Yeah, that's where it is.
Yes.
Okay. So the UN has, you know, a 30 and 30 kind of target. And we would, in this project would be in its small part, helping to go move Arlington in that direction of restoring 30% of Arlington land. And of course, we've been working on reducing the invasives, again, in this small part of Arlington by 50%. Nice, beautiful picture of biodiversity. We all know what it is, but I thought this was a gorgeous way to depict the value that we get from biodiversity. Ecosystems are a bit like sports teams in that if you lose something, and you lose too many things out of a particular ecosystem, then you end up with biodiversity loss. So we were a bit worried because even though what we have been cutting is invasive, it's bittersweet, which produces berries, and multiflora rose, again, abundance of berries. So that's part of why we decided we wanted to try to get some return of berries to McLennan. And so what we did was in the spring, we got 25 bare root shrubs. We were lucky. We're not able to get these directly from the New Hampshire tree forest, but an artist in Cambridge was making some available that she had ordered. So we were able to order 25, $42.50 is the total cost. Very economical, as I hope you would agree. And in October, all 25 shrubs survived, even with 2 droughts, July and the August-September droughts, and we didn't do any hand watering. So we were very thrilled about that. The areas where we planted them were largely in the areas where we have removed or have done cutting of bittersweet. So one area is right in here along the path. We focused on path locations for this planting. We did not plant anything in this area, but we planted along in here, just 2 or 3, and then did some planting within the 10-foot no-mow zone in the front of the retention pond. And just a real quick look at some of how the plants looked in October. Elderberry, 2 kinds of dogwood, excuse me, just a nannyberry and aronia berry. So that brings me to what we'd like to do next and get permission for. The first thing is we would like to continue our current work of controlling the woody invasives. There's been a bit of a hitch with the change at recreation. Previously, we were getting administrative permission from the director. And now with the changes, they do want to streamline somewhat a permissions process, get something going that's going to be able to be carried forward in an ongoing way, which I'm thrilled about that is happening. But it has meant that we have had to pause our work and have not done anything yet at McLennan, whereas previous years, past 2 years, we started working in both November and December. in the wetlands area. Nothing's happened yet this year. So we would love to continue. The next thought is that it might be nice to get some forbs into the area, especially around the retention pond where there's a lot of sun, and just increasing the plugs. We have access to native plants, small native plants that are being grown from the Mystic Charles Pollinator Pathways group. Lots of people are doing winter sowing planting, and we would be able to add some of that material into the NOMO area around the pond. We would like to continue the bare root shrub plantings, perhaps bring a little bit more into the wetlands itself in areas where we're seeing, for example, that a multiflora rose flourished, indicating there might be light in that spot, cutting that back and putting in some other kind of plant in its place. And then you've seen this proposal before, which is the removal of a very large, what I would call a specimen multiflora rose that's behind the pond. It's been there, mowed around, perhaps even carefully shaped at some point. We would like to use that as a demonstration education site, remove that, have some signage that shows what it looked like, and replace it with some other shrubs. This has been a bit on hold for operational reasons, but we still see that as something that would be nice to have at McLennan. And so that's the proposal, and interested in what your thoughts are. Thank you.
Chuck, you're on mute.
I didn't see who had their hand up first, but I want to go with
Susan.
David. Was it Susan? All right, Susan,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Okay. First, thank you so much, Elaine, for this excellent presentation and for all your hard work and organizing the volunteers for this activity. I and my husband were two of the volunteers who planted in the spring, and I'm just thrilled that all those plants survived. I think that's excellent. I am in full support of all your requests. I think it's great to put native plants in the no-mow zone. It's going to be more of a barrier and understanding for the DPW not to mow there, hopefully. I think removing large specimen multiflora rose would be a great idea with some signage so people can really understand what's going on here. Replace it with something that's significant, maybe not a bare root shrub, maybe we can raise some money or get something a little bit bigger to kind of like show, well, this is a native, we don't need to water it. It's helping the biodiversity, that kind of thing. So I'm in full support. Thank you.
Thank you.
I saw David Kaplan, but if that's not it, someone else.
Sure.
So,
no, I just want to echo Susan and say thank you, Elaine, for your work and the work of your all the volunteers and everybody involved. Yeah, I'm also in full support. I think it's a great to remove invasives and plant natives. So thank you.
sure, Nathaniel Stevens.
Thanks, Chuck, and thank you, Elaine. Just echoing what David and Susan said as well. I just a note, I would, for the benefit of the commission, I did attend the Park and Rec Commission meeting at which Elaine presented this and discussed it with the commission. But yes, so I think she appreciates the need to get the Park and Rec sign off on it. I just can't remember what Park and Rec actually ended up doing or how they ended up acting, but we can certainly give our blessing from the wetlands perspective. But ultimately, I think, as you know, it was probably made clear at that meeting that you do need to get Park and Rec's blessing on that.
Absolutely. And David, I think, might be able to shed light on where that is. My understanding from that meeting was that David, Morgan and Natasha
Natasha.
together to plan some way of, I think that the quote was streamlining the permission process from the permission, Park and Rec permissions.
Right. And my recollection of that conversation at the Park and Rec meeting was that they were going to develop a form so that in the future, projects like this could be submitted on a single form, but I'm just not clear as to how it leaves you, because you're sort of mid-process, midstream with Park and Rec. So I think that's just something to note. And that's what I want to say is, I don't think you should have to wait for a application form to be developed by David and Natasha and then signed off by both boards, of course, because that could be months away. So I guess I would just check with Park and Rec just to see. I just can't remember if they even voted to say fine, go ahead, or if
No, they didn't.
No, I didn't think so, unfortunately, but I think if we give it our blessing. So that's all, just some process in there, but looks great. Thanks.
Sure, David White.
Definitely a good project. My full support. And I'm thinking also maybe some youth might be interested in doing some heavy work, like digging out the multi-floor rows and so on. Sometimes we got high school kids to do work for us other places. So DPW can't come through. Other groups can maybe.
I do need to check on that because we have not been doing digging. But because my understanding was that we would need express permission for that.
You would, yeah, probably, yes.
So that would be something, I mean, if that's something that the commission would consider, there are certainly some areas that it would be useful to get some of the multi-floor rows or the bittersweet, not so much the huge bittersweet, but the medium-sized to try and the areas that are not too close to the wetlands, that are sort of in more solidified ground. That would be where I would kind of want to try to maybe actually remove some of these. So it's not, you don't have to keep coming back and cutting.
Yeah, there's a resource area because it's next to the pond. So it needs to be protections, I think, and prove from us.
Yeah, some of it's wetlands that's not really ponding, so it's more of a vernal pool kind of area. And then the other part is the pond, which has more of a bank.
There's also next to the pond too, so.
Yeah. So that is one question that I have personally about how we would proceed to get to that next step of being able to, or, what the decision process would be about which areas that would be possible to do some actual removal by roots in. So.
David, you're gonna have to hold off because Brian's been waiting.
Yeah, well, I'll quickly echo everyone else's comments and compliments, Elaine. Great work. My only other comment would be, it would be great to see sort of a townwide comprehensive view to some of these properties and their invasives and restoration plans, just like Elaine is doing, but at other properties, and with some guidance and support from perhaps planning or Park and Rec. There's $1 million or so of funding requests for CPA money for McLennan for the gardens and the skate park, and it seems to me that this kind of project is also deserving of some level of funding as well. So I'm just saying, great work. It'd be great if the town could continue to support you and other volunteers at a higher level and with more resources.
Right, great. Sure.
So
David
Brian,
Morgan.
I have a question because you're on the CPA. So Elaine could put a CPA proposal together. Maybe this year's too late because obviously we passed it, but she could put a proposal together, maybe with Concom's blessing, earlier next year and get funding for kind of a more comprehensive biodiversity advancement at McLennan or another location. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think that's where that is, and that's I was in more general, but that's a very concrete example of something that could be done. I know David's work with the his two proposals is also going to fund some town resources looking at these properties. I know McLennan's on that list, but in general, yeah, Elaine, that seems like a great idea. Perhaps.
Something to think about for next year, Elaine.
Yeah.
Okay.
David Morgan.
Love that idea, Brian. Happy to work with you on it, Elaine. Wanted to step back to David White's comment about removing the multiflora rose and digging it out, and then Elaine's thoughts about sort of the bigger question of approvals for that kind of activity. And my conversations with Elaine have involved sort of a blanket no on digging things up from the get-go for that reason. But I just looked over our administrative approval regulations, and I think that there's sufficient reason or ground for us to include that kind of activity. I mean, we say that activities that are temporary in nature have negligible impacts, like monitoring wells, exploratory borings, sediment sampling, etc., are all fair game. Got to even include installation of underground activities within the rights of way, granted, but there are some activities here that are more invasive, I think, that are eligible for administrative approval. And we also have the last clause of this section at E that says, notwithstanding the foregoing, we can approve, I can approve the maintenance, plantings, and invasive plant management, provided it's done by hand and natives are put in to the same area. So I think it's now more nuanced with our, well, last year's updates to the administrative approval section. And I would ask the commission if they're okay with that kind of activity. It's a pretty limited scope of work. If you would be comfortable with my exercising judgment about administrative approvals for the kinds of things that Elaine's proposing.
Yeah, so David, I think in this context where Elaine is presenting a project, that we're going to get into a different discussion. And I don't know all the ins and outs of where you would go with digging and how close you would get. And I think that was one of my concerns. And that's why we stopped it at that point. And this is also recreation parkland. And I do think that when you bring this project in front of the commission and we say we support it, it probably has a little bit more weight than if you're just administratively approving a project. Now, I think I could agree to make some changes on conservation land, but this one I'm a little concerned about. And we're not here to, there's no application in front of us. We're just looking for a vote to support this work. That's as my understanding of what we're doing here tonight.
I think the commission needs to weigh in with Park and Rec so they have our support behind the project if it goes forward.
But our support, okay, so let me understand this. Normally, we give David Morgan free rein on administrative approvals. So this type of work, if it didn't include digging, so if it didn't include that one item about that big multiflora rose, would really be a slam dunk. It would be David's approval at an administrative level. That's why we made those changes. It wouldn't have even come to the commission except if we wanted to hear about all the great things that are happening, which we do. So I'm thinking that it's a vote of approval and administrative approval. And maybe you can delete the rows for now, and let's discuss that at a later date so we don't hold up all the rest of the work.
Now, the Rose is a separate proposal that you've had, that you've seen. I can resubmit that separately. I put it in this just because it's a lingering
Issue.
agenda item.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which makes sense.
Yeah. I'm not comfortable with the administrative approval. I'd like to look into these things. I mean, Susan, you may be well up on the administrative approval criteria, but I'm not. And it wasn't presented that way on the agenda. It was, you know, nothing, no issues with this project. But I think the point is that we want a project that we approve and people understand that the full force of the Conservation Commission is behind this project. And so that was my comment. I also remember Millbrook, where we wanted an RDA, and were they digging any of those trees and shrubs and branches, those invasives out of the ground? I don't think so.
I don't know what you're referring to.
The
so-
Millbrook Apartments with Parterre, that was an RDA. And that was not
Right, no, they're
administrative
not,
approval.
they're not digging, but it was much more extensive than this, and they were working on bank.
Were they-
And Elaine is not working on bank.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead, Elaine.
She's looking
I
in
just was
close
asking
proximity
whether they
to
were
the
using-
resource area.
Yeah,
Well,
So-
I was just wondering whether the other group was using chemicals, herbicides.
Yeah, the first time they did not, and I'm not sure if that was administrative approval on that.
it was. And they came, and you're right, Elaine, they came back for an RDA because they wanted to potentially use herbicides. They got an administrative approval. David has it in his project notes.
Right. And so we have never asked for that, for herbicide use.
Mhm.
And the reality of any kind of invasive removal is it keeps coming back if you don't get the roots or if you don't kill them. So one way or the other. You know, one of those two things at some point needs to happen usually to really get rid of some of this.
David Kaplan.
Thank you. Just so in the interest of moving on, it sounds like we're all in agreement that we're going to support this project. And I think it does sound like commissioners have brought up some interesting points that we could potentially discuss in the future about adding certain limited invasive species, digging and removals, perhaps just in the buffer zone, and we can just bring that up for discussion at a future meeting.
I hear you. I think I'd like to get back on track also.
Thank you.
So with that, we're looking for a vote to support this project.
So
And
moved.
A second.
I'll second.
Nathaniel Stevens and David Kaplan. Mike Gildersgame,
Yes.
Susan Chapnick,
Yes,
David White,
Yes.
David Kaplan,
Yes.
Brian McBride,
Yes.
Nathaniel Stevens,
Yes.
and Chuck Tirone says yes.
just for clarity, we're approving the project without digging at this point. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, so Elaine, you can take that. I mean, we'll write notes and hopefully we'll get minutes. We're a little behind on our minutes. But if you need, I'm sure David Morgan can write you a letter about the vote
Mhm.
taken at the commission and the approval for this project without the digging.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. I hope I'm not overstepping what you can do, David.
Perfectly good.
Okay.
Okay, so moving on, we have George Parsons here on a proposed Spy Pond coring study And I know that George is here. I saw him before. There he is. Could you introduce yourself to the commission and
Sure.
sure, oh, there you
My
are.
name-
Thank you.
My name is George Parsons. I'm a retired chemist. And I'm with the Arlington Historical Society. I'm applying for a coring project on Spy Pond. I have a presentation if you'd make me a co-host.
Able to click share at the bottom of your screen there.
Yeah.
Hold on. Got it.
Can you all see it?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. What we're proposing is an archaeological coring of Spy Pond. And you might ask why we want to do that. A tusk was found by a fisherman in Spy Pond back in 1959, found in 3 feet of water. It was carbon 14 dated by the Museum of Science and found to be 43,000 years old. It was assumed by the Museum of Science to be a mastodon tusk. More recently, we resampled the tusk and had it carbon 14 dated with more modern methods, and the current results confirm the earlier date. I thought the date may be strange out of context because that tusk shouldn't be there, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. There are growth lines in ivory that can be used to distinguish fossil ivory, like mastodon and mammoth or walrus, from modern elephant. And the growth lines in this tusk and the nitrogen-15 results that were sort of a side product of the carbon-14 dating were more consistent with mammoth than mastodon. Nitrogen-15 accumulates differently in woody plants and in grasses, and that shows up in what the animals ate. Mastodons ate trees and shrubs. Mammoths ate grasses. We also were able to do DNA studies on this mammoth tusk. It's absolutely astounding to me that you can do DNA studies on something that's this old, but it confirmed that it was mammoth. We can actually place this animal in a family of mammoths in North America. We're also awaiting further isotope results, strontium, sulfur, and oxygen, to localize where this animal lived. The isotope ratios of those 4 elements differ from place to place. And by checking the isotope ratios of these 3 elements, we should be able to find out whether this animal lived here in New England or maybe in Alaska or Ohio or somewhere else. This is the tusk. I don't know how many of you have seen this tusk. It's on display at the Arlington Historical Society. You don't get to see this part because this is the part we put against the wall, because as you can see, it's in pretty rough shape. But what is kind of interesting is the tusk grows from the bottom out, and these successive cones represent years of growth in the animal. Funny sidelight in the sampling of the tusk, you just do it with a Dremel tool with a cutting blade. And you know the smell that you get in the dentist chair when they're drilling away at your teeth? That's exactly what this smells like. And it makes sense because this is a tooth. So it's kind of a mystery. 26,000 years ago, the glaciers bulldozed this area and swept anything that wasn't bedrock basically into Nantucket Sound. So how did a 43,000-year-old tusk end up at the bottom of Spy Pond in 3 feet of water? And before anybody decides it maybe floated to the surface, mammoth ivory is quite dense. It has a density of 1.45 grams per centimeter cube. Water has a density of 1. Wood has a density of about 0.8. Oil, 0.6, 0.8. So those things float. Mammoth ivory does not float in water. An old geological study of Spy Pond suggests that there's 40 feet of peat. I've been corrected. It's organic sediment now under the waters of Spy Pond. So the questions to be asked are, have the sediments under Spy Pond been disturbed? And did this animal live in our area? He may not have. Proposed study involves a couple of academics who are experts in this area. Dr. Wyatt Oswald has joint appointments at Emerson and a facility called the Harvard Forest Museum out in Petersham, Massachusetts. And Dr. Meredith Kelly from Dartmouth have been coring ponds all over New England. And the cores are taken by hand from a platform of 2 canoes with a piece of plywood over them. And they're taken in 3-foot sections over several locations in the pond. And then they're frozen in that Harvard Forest Museum in Petersham for study. Carbon-14 dating will tell us where we've got continuity or disturbance. Wyatt was telling me about a pond in Brookline that they cored recently, and the top layer was perfectly consistent. The carbon-14 dating was recent, and then there was a 10,000-year gap in the record. And what they found out was that somebody had dredged the pond about 200 years ago to make it a little bit deeper. So pond sediments can be disturbed. The detailed analysis that we're going to do on these segments are, we're going to look at pollen grains in the sediments, and that will indicate what plants were growing around Spy Pond over the last 14,000 years. Hopefully none of it was bittersweet. We'll also look at charcoal particles that correlate with fire history around the pond. One of the questions asked by this Community Preservation Act Committee was, could we involve Arlington High students? So I got in touch with a couple of environmental science and earth science teachers at the high school, and they were very enthusiastic about the possibility of involving the high school students. And what we'd have them do is look at the charcoal particles in the sediments. There are other results that could be determined as well. This is an area that's just exploding with new scientific methods. There was a paper recently published about Yellowstone Lake, and they can determine what animals were grazing around that lake in Yellowstone National Park by the steroids that were in their dung. There's also been studies where they were able to recover environmental DNA in peat in northern Greenland that's 2 million years old. So I think there's a lot of things that we could be learning about the very, very early paleohistory of Arlington. And what we're going to do with all of this information is crafted into a new exhibit at the Arlington Historical Society Museum. We've generated a budget of $38,000. It's mostly for the carbon-14 determinations and pollen studies. Doctors Oswald and Kelly are donating their time and supplying the equipment. A preliminary Community Preservation Act application has been advanced to the next level. That's due on December 20th. And historic preservation is one of the approved uses of CPA funds. One of the questions that the CPA committee had was, is this really historic preservation? So I educated myself on that. And the Coalition for Community Preservation has a website, and they define historic preservation as a building, structure, real property, document, or artifact that has been listed on the State Register of Historic Places. And this is not, Spy Pond is not listed, or has been determined by a local historic preservation commission to be significant in the history of archaeology, architecture, or culture of a town or city. And I met with the Arlington Historical Commission on Tuesday of this week, and they, in their wisdom, have designated Spy Pond as an historic and cultural resource. So the project appears to qualify for CPA historic preservation funding. The Spy Pond historic record is voluminous, and I won't take up your time with all of it, but the first record that we have of somebody doing something at Spy Pond was in 1666, 30 years after the founding of Arlington, or West Cambridge at the time, to harvest hay. Mother Braderick, and I've seen Broderick, I've seen multiple spellings of this name, collected dandelions and 6 redcoats fleeing the supply wagon ambush on April 19, 1775. There's been extensive ice harvesting on Spy Pond, and I have a pen drawing of that. and market gardening. And I never knew this. There was a hotel that stood on a hill in the 1860s in what is now Kensington Manor. The hotel, visitors would get off at the Lake Street stop station on the railroad to come visit this hotel. Here's a print of ice harvesting on Spy Pond. I never knew that at the peak, they are harvesting 150,000 tons of ice and shipping it all over the world, just insulated in sawdust and hay. And here is a line drawing from Eva Bauzos' book on Spy Pond stories on the Taft's Hotel. And the buildings off here to the left are ice houses that stood where the apartment buildings are now on Spy Pond. The hill no longer exists because the hotel burned down sometime in the 1880s, and somebody mined the sand and gravel and basically leveled the hill. So there's been quite a bit of change around Spy Pond over the last few centuries. Current status of Spy Pond, at 103 acres, it's classified as a great pond and is owned by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So I got in touch with the Waterways Program of the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. And they said that coring activities would be subject to Chapter 991 jurisdiction, which is the Waterways Act. But it doesn't it doesn't meet the threshold for authorization. But they do want a copy of the report for their files. So it suggests that they're interested in it as well. Chapter 91 requires authorization for any activities that would impact the protected water source. You can't build a dock, you can't change the embankment, you can't clear vegetation around a protected area. So I think that the pond is pretty well protected already. Ponds as historic resources. Not surprisingly, Walden Pond in Lincoln and Concord is listed in that MACRIS information system. But there's an obscure little pond in Acton that's also listed in the MACRIS. So there's precedent in declaring Spy Pond and historic resource. Next steps, we're going to work with the Arlington Historical Commission and Massachusetts Historic Commission to get Spy Pond listed on MACRIS. Next CPA submission is December 20th, 2024. That's my deadline. And I'd like to ask for a letter of community support from the Conservation Commission for this project. And I'll open it up to questions.
Thank you. That was a great presentation. Any questions from the commission? I see Susan has her hand up.
Sorry, I couldn't find my other little hand button quickly enough. Thank you for that presentation, George. That's really interesting. I didn't know all that history, and I don't know that I know the difference between a mammoth and a mastodon. Do you know the difference?
They both died out about 10,000 years ago.
And they're from the same era.
Yeah. They actually they look quite a bit alike. The mastodon's a little bit smaller than the mammoth, but as I said, they have different diets, and they actually shared a last common ancestor 26 million years ago. And I learned that because I suggested, well, maybe this beast was a hybrid between a mammoth and a mastodon. Not possible. They're just too evolutionarily separate.
Interesting. So I found this very interesting. From our knowledge of Spy Pond, we know that the sediments have been very disturbed. So it would be interesting to see what happens in the cores. So there have been Tufts University scientists that have shown that over the years. I don't know the exact data. I view that I'm very supportive of this. I view this as similar to doing test pits at a site. Considering that you're doing it by hand, you're not using machinery, you're doing it from a boat that doesn't have any motor on it. So I look at this like an exploratory test pit, which we support routinely on projects to find out what's going on at a site. So
Okay.
in full support. Now, that said, I don't know, we'll ask the chair what he thinks. If you need a formal administrative approval to do this work from the Conservation Commission or just a letter of support. So that would be something for the chair or maybe Nathaniel Stevens to flesh out.
I believe David Morgan was in contact with Wyatt Oswald, and I believe there was some sort of a permit granted. I may be using the wrong terminology, David.
I did grant administrative approval for this work.
Thank you, David.
We had discussed it previously without this presentation. It was just a correspondence and discussion, and it seemed like there were no objections to move forward with it.
Nathaniel Stevens, have your hand up?
Thanks, Chuck. Yeah, thanks, George. I echo Susan's thanks for the good presentation. Maybe I missed it, but how deep are you coring? How deep are you going below the surface, below the bottom of the pond?
There's an older geological survey, I think it was 1903, that said there was 40 feet of peat in some places. And the generally accepted accumulation rate is 1 millimeter a year. So if you take 14,000 years and multiply it by 1 millimeter a year, you come out pretty close to 40 feet.
Okay, thanks. I was just commenting on the permitting. I don't think it even needed administrative approval, but I'm glad that's done. I would make a motion to support this, to offer a letter of support for this project for the CPA purposes.
Can I get a second?
I second that.
I don't know who was first. Was it Mike Gilderscame? I'm not sure.
David White, I think.
David White. Okay, great. Nathaniel Stevens and David White. And so Mike Gilderscame.
Yes.
Susan Chapnick.
Yes.
David Kaplan.
Yes.
Brian McBride.
Yes.
Nathaniel Stevens.
Yes.
David White.
Yes.
And Chuck Teroni says yes. I think there was a question in the chat that asked for a copy of this presentation. Could you provide that to David Morgan?
Absolutely.
All right, thank you very much for that. Okay.
Can I make one small comment? David Morgan, when you write a letter of support from the Conservation Commission and you record the vote on this day and who voted, could you also attach the administrative approval and maybe a copy of the presentation? I think that would be helpful to the CPA committee to have all that together. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for inviting me to your meeting. I appreciate it. And I appreciate meeting you. So
You're very welcome.
Thank you,
And,
George.
thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
okay. David, I'll get this to you tomorrow.
All right,
Yeah,
and David, that goes the same for Elaine's presentation and what Susan said about wrapping it all up in nice package for the CPA committee. Moving right along, I want to do this really quick, so I'm just going to do it myself. So we have 3 enforcement orders, 66R Dudley, 335 Mystic Street, and 40 Park Ave. All 3 will be at our next meeting. That's the update. Moving on, we have Water Bodies Working Group. Any report, David White?
Things are pretty quiet this time of year. We have a report on Hills Pond, report on Spy Pond probably later this month. Looking on the annual report, also on the budget for next year. So a lot of things going on, but not really much news yet. Dave, anything to add?
I think that about covers it.
All right. Moving on from there, we have a tree committee update from Sarah Alfaro Franco. And there you go.
Oh, sorry. There has not, sorry for the interruption. There has not been a meeting since the last time we met. Our next meeting is next week, and I will have an update after that.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. CPA from Brian McBride.
Yeah, no news here really. You're seeing this flurry of letters for the December 20th submission deadline date. So that will be the next big breakthrough for CPA when all the proposals get fully submitted on the 20th.
Great. Well, thank you, Brian. We're very fortunate to have you keeping such a close tab on all of our projects and reaching out when needed to David White and David Morgan and anyone else who needs to understand the process. We have a Park and Recreation Committee update. Not sure who's going to do that. So did I hear that Nathaniel went to the last meeting?
Well, the last meeting was
Yes, you
this
did.
Tuesday, and nobody went.
Yeah, right. I was gonna say, I think we missed one.
But there was,
if there
we
was
missed one, and there was one you went to before that.
Mm-hmm.
Or is it next week? I was just looking at the website to see, but yeah, I think we decided we weren't going to go unless there was something that we
Right.
or we
So
were
I looked
asked
at
to go.
the,
Or
right, I looked at the agenda for Tuesday. I'd like to hear
Oh,
what
you
David
did.
Morgan has to say about that. But David Morgan was on the agenda for Tuesday to present the CPA proposals to Park and Rec, the two of them. And so then I reached out to David Morgan and said, well, if you're going, I'm not going to go. And he said, well, there's some confusion there. So what happened with that, David?
Natasha had put me on without communicating to me that she had put me on. She got tied up with other things, as happens, had to get the agenda out in a timely manner for open meeting law. And so I drafted a memo for her saying, here are the talking points. Sorry, I'm not able to attend, etc. I haven't heard since whether there was any resolution about those letters of recommendation or support. So need to follow up with Natasha to find out.
Okay. We'll make sure we have that on our next meeting.
Chuck, related to that, David, have you started your monthly meetings with Natasha yet?
We've had one.
Okay.
We were scheduled to meet first Mondays of the month, but she was out at the start of this week, so we're rescheduling for this month.
Excellent.
So I was gonna actually follow up with that too. So David, I'm gonna be a little more tough on you. Can we assume that this is a standard practice now and that once a month you'll be meeting with Natasha? Now, I'm not talking about the occasion where you're gonna be sick or something happens, but this is moving forward, you'll be meeting.
Yeah, that is both of our plans. Yeah.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, how do you meet? Zoom, or are you in the same building? I don't even know.
She's in a building just over there. She's sort
And
of
so you
over my left shoulder.
do you go to Natasha?
That's what happened last time. She was flexible for other arrangements, but we're planning to meet in person.
Sounds good. All right. So it
Yeah,
sounds like the
they're-
plan
they're-
works.
What'd you say, Nathaniel?
Yeah.
I was gonna say that my understanding is her office is over in that school
Not working.
building near,
Not working, Nathaniel. We're not
Irving
hearing you.
Street, is it?
You're right.
Yeah.
Yep.
There you go. Try now.
Yeah, sorry about that. My understanding is Natasha is now over on Irving Street, right? Not next door at the senior center.
Senior Center, yeah.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, that was the last meeting I went to, was on Irving Street. Okay, so the plan is to monitor the agenda, and if there's something that the three of us feel like we need to be a part of, we'll reach out and find out who's available. Otherwise, David will be having a monthly meeting. And with that, it's Daniel, it's you again, because we don't know, but was there an update we can get about the Sims conservation restriction?
I'm trying to think. No, I don't think there's a further update from last time. We did have a meeting. We discussed, I'm sorry, no, we did meet since our last Conservation Commission meeting. I met with the Dave Lapointe from the Beals and Thomas and Chris from the Land Trust. And we just reviewed again the encroachments, and we're trying to divide them into categories of which ones that we need to send really nasty letters to, or which ones we need to send just more kinder, gentler follow-up letters. And so he's working on that. we actually have a meeting scheduled for either tomorrow or early next week.
Great.
But again, slowly making progress on that. Oh, and sorry, the other thing is we were supposed to have an update as to what the property owner is going to do with the forest management plan. As you recall, we submitted comments on it. We even had a meeting about it a year ago, September. And the person who was supposed to report back to me before Thanksgiving then went out on vacation and is coming back later this week. So we expect to have an update, I think, by the end of next week, if I remember, about not an update on the actual plan, but an update about what they're going to do about the plan.
Oh,
So we may need to press them again to say, you need to do the plan. There's no need to update us about the plan. The plan needs to be done. Yeah.
So Nathaniel, just clarification. Is that your group or the Conservation Commission that is going to press them and get the updates? I kind of lost you.
We can certainly, I've told them that the Conservation Commission wants to review the next iteration of the plan. So we're pressing them to get that done. So the working group, or I'll
The
call
working
it
group is doing the
David
pressing.
Morgan,
Okay.
Chris, and I will press them to make a decision and get it going and get the update to the commission. But yeah, certainly we're not going to review it. It's going to come to the full Conservation Commission to discuss, have a public hearing on it.
Okay, great. All right, so that ends our updates from our liaisons to the boards. And with that, we're going to go to our first hearing, which is Thorndike Place, file number 910356. This is a continuation. At the applicant's request, we are continuing to the 19th of December. If you want any correspondence about this, including anything that was just received, we should have that on the Thorndike page. But if you don't find what you're looking for there, reach out to David Morgan. And with that, can I get a motion to continue to December 19th?
So moved.
A second.
Second.
Mike Gilbiscane. All right. Susan Chapnick.
Yes.
David White. Oops, David White has recused himself. So I take that back. So Susan said yes. David Kaplan.
Yes.
Brian McBride.
Yes.
Mike Gilbiscane.
Yes.
Nathaniel Stevens.
Yes.
And Chuck Tironi says yes. This was continued to the 19th of December. Okay, that ends our agenda. And I just want to reach out and say, is anyone here that has a comment that's attended tonight's meeting? Just please use the raise hand function or turn your video on, and we'll know that you want to say something. Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
we'll move.
Second.
Okay, got a motion and a second. I think we all should just indicate that we're agree by waving our hands, unanimous. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you on the 19th.
Thank you.
All right.
Yep. Good
Thanks,
night,
everybody.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
ACMi productions are only made possible with your support. Visit patreon.com/ACMi to learn how you can help.